Lee, Chad, welcome to the Land Podcast. How's it going?
Good. Beautifully here in Iowa.
I can imagine. I wouldn't imagine any other way.
Great to be with you, Jake.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for doing this. I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since we got connected, and you guys have been gracious enough to kind of give an outline on basically your entire, I'll just call it land journey, life journey. I think they kind of mesh together, and I think this is a conversation that everyone needs to hear. And there's, I'm sure, going to be a lot of key lessons throughout here, and some we've just seen in the real estate market the last ever since I've paid attention. It's been great, but I understand that it's not always great, and sometimes things can go wrong. And this is a story of where things can go wrong and how if you stay the course of whatever you would like, sometimes it ends up a little bit better. But before we get into all that, feel free to introduce the both of yourselves, and then we'll get right into it.
Go ahead, Chad.
Yeah, Chad Williams, live in Southwest Iowa, and I actually have a digital marketing business, but got into bow hunting. Boy, 2017 was the first deer that I shot with a bow, and the bug hit me pretty hard. And we'll be talking about the land journey that has happened since then.
Yeah,
I'm Lee Williams. I'm Chad's dad. Southwest Iowa, born and raised. I did spend 10 years in Omaha, Nebraska, doing college and working for the corporate scene for a while, but then returned to the farm in 1976. And I've hunted pretty much all my life. I could take you out just about 100 yards from where I'm sitting right now, and I could point you to the place where I shot my first doe with my dad. I probably was 16 years old, 15, something like that. So this is just kind of where I was born and raised, in this area.
I have to imagine at that time when you shot a deer, was that a big deal of just shooting a deer, period, or seeing a deer? Because I've heard other people that have been around a long time, and depending on what part of the country you're from, just seeing a deer at one point was kind of crazy. Or
Well,
was there always deer?
talking to my mom when they were growing up, deer weren't around here in Iowa. They were born and raised right here. And I remember, they had the lottery to get a buck, and and all kinds of things. So it was a pretty big thing. Of course, any kid, you get your first deer, you're pretty proud. So that was a pretty cool deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's crazy how no matter what your first deer is for anyone, that
Yeah.
is a memory that is always cemented in your mind forever. Specifically, so it's funny you can mention that. You can take you right to the spot, but. So I would just be kind of curious. There's a lot that I want to get through here today. And you mentioned you're born and raised there, and then you went to Nebraska for a while. But just give us kind of your relationship with land growing up. And then I kind of want to just go through basically your life here, if you're willing to do so.
Well, I'll try to summarize it because you probably don't have 3 hours. But my dad was a farmer, and so I was raised on a farm in Southwest Iowa. I never expected to come back to the farm. I enjoyed it. I was always enjoyed walking and working with my hands. But I left high school. In fact, Dad bought his first farm in 1961, which is the one I'm on now. And we moved in March of '62, and 282 acres for $100 an acre, which is unheard of now.
And that was tillable too.
Yeah. And so it was the livestock. He had a dairy cows, we had stock cows, hogs, corn, beans, hay. So I knew how to work. But then I left, went to college, didn't think I'd ever be back at the farm. And after college, I met my wife in college, and working part-time through college. I worked for the Bell System when it was a telephone company back then. And as soon as I graduated, they took me into management, and I did that for 3 years. But I just didn't like the city. My wife was born and raised in South Dakota, a farm girl. She didn't like the city. So we thought about it, prayed about it, and I consulted some different ones. And so in '76, we moved back to the farm with my dad and my brother. And quite honestly, Jake, I loved farming with my dad and my brother. I really did. I didn't like the dairy cows. My brother could have those. He was married to them, but everything else I liked.
Mm-hmm.
And things went well, considering the first couple of years. Fortunately, my wife's an RN, and that kind of helped us through those first years. But then, as you probably heard, the '80s hit, and I think it was '80. I got hailed out twice, And then a couple years later, I got droughed out. Uh, my north farm did 60 bushel. My middle farm did about 30 bushel. My south farm of 200 acres did about 5 bushel the acre. And my dad, well, interest rates then were above 20%.
So
And
I mean, there's a lot. So there, back when you bought it, when your family bought that farm for $100 an acre, was that a lot at that point where the neighbors were like, "Oh, so and so paid $100 an acre," or was that still a good deal back then?
that was probably a pretty good deal because my dad, we had tried to buy the farm 3 years prior to, and a doctor in Chicago bought it. And he put a manager on it, had a manager, and that manager, whatever the story is, the doctor contacted the same realtor. I don't tell the manager, I'm going to sell it. Well, Dad, of course, knew the realtor, and he bought the farm for then 10,000, about $8,000 less than what the doctor paid for it. So I think it was going price at that time.
Hmm.
Um, and so, and it's not all flat ground. We have hills, we got timber, we got some bottom ground. So it's
It's like the
both.
epitome of an
Both
Iowa
it.
farm.
Yeah,
When I think of an Iowa farm that's that size, it has usually all those things.
yeah, that's right.
And so when you're making, so you worked in corporate America, you lived in the city. Obviously, it wasn't the right fit for your guys' family. Making the move back to the farm, and you mentioned your wife was an RN at the time. So, I mean, I think this is a dynamic that a lot of farming families still see today, where the wife has a job in town, and
Yeah.
then the husband works on the farm, and it's a single income or dual income, however you want to look at it. Was that nerve wracking at that point, having a family and then planning to farm full time?
Um, but it had stress. I mean, whenever farming is you kind of left open to the elements. Um, but she was a farm girl, and we knew what was expected, and it's something that we loved it, and
Mhm.
I think it was more stressful for her. Her up in South Dakota, her father was a pretty well-to-do guy, well set up. They were 40 when she was born, so they were well set. Um, and so it was probably a little more stressful for her. But you put in long hours. You start at 6 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning. Oftentimes you go a little later, 6, 7, 8 o'clock, sometimes later than that, depending on harvest season, planting season. You
Mhm.
have your free time too, but I think it was pretty normal for that
And
time.
yeah, and so you move back, you make this move, you adjust, and then you mentioned as far as timing goes, around the 76 is when you moved back to the farm, and then you started farming in the 80s, and then it sounds like you just hit the worst storm you could imagine, figuratively and literally, when it comes to droughts, hail, the interest rate environment. And so, like that first hard year, what did you say at the end of the year? What did you tell your wife? What did you tell your family? What did you tell yourself?
You know, the thing that went to my mind, Jake, is that I think what kept me sane, we call the '80s the dark ages of our life. And what kept me sane is that we didn't just jump out and leave Omaha and come out. We thought about it, we prayed about it. There was no doubt in our mind that we were where God wants to be. And I think that with that foundation, that kept me at least focused correctly and difficult during those times. Um, but it was difficult. I mean, there was a couple those first when we had those hailstorms. I mean, the hail hit. It was the first week in June, and we had 240 acres, about 12 miles north of where we were living. And it was the crop was about 8-10 inches tall. It looked beautiful, and we went up the next morning, and it looked like nothing had been planted. It was just bare ground.
Wow.
It was the hail, and so it just cut the corn off, washed it away. The bark of the trees on that side of the where the hit was torn off. And I remember walking out there and looking at that. And my wife was with me, and we were kind of holding hands, and tears welled up in my eyes as well as hers too. And
Mhm.
but a farmer has kind of a positive. He said, "Well, okay, you kind of figure there's a growing point where corn might grow back, but it was maybe just past that." So we let the ground dry out. I turned around and planted again. Got finished completely with that whole thing 2 weeks later, and that very night, the second hailstorm hit. And of course, the ground was loosened up, nothing to protect there at all. And it was tough. It was very tough. That was an 80, or that was 80. And
You have
then
crop insurance to cover it, didn't you?
no, there
gonna
was
be-
insurance around, but I was too cheap. Too cheap.
uh-huh.
But then 2 years later, when we had that drought, we were struggling then, and I added another 400 acres with another guy to what I was already planning, and thinking, okay, this is the way we can get ahead. And then when that produced 5 bushel the acre, we filed for bankruptcy in '84. Of course, that's a process. We finally, this farm sale was in March of '87, and I lost my dad in April of '86.
Mm-hmm.
So, my dad was the guy that always looked ahead, did the numbers. He was, even to the day he died, he was, how can we make this work? How can we work it? And so, in a way, like I said before, we call that the dark ages of our life. And if it wasn't for our faith, we wouldn't. The one thing I remember about that, Jake, this involves Chad. It was common. A lot of young men were having the same trouble we were having. I mean, a lot of young. There was a movie that came out called Country, if I remember right, and it was about a farm foreclosure. And so we didn't have the money to attend many movies, but we went to the movie, took the kids, and I don't know, they're probably grade school, I think, still. And I think Judy and I cried through the whole movie. It was just so close to home.
Mm-hmm.
We got back out the car, and here we got little 3 kids in the back seat. And I turned around and says, "Kids, what'd you think of that movie?" And they said, "Oh, it was great, Dad." Oh. But even that, years went on, and every one of my kids have come back and said, "Dad and Mom, we're glad that you stuck together. We're glad that you were on the farm. You taught us how to work. You taught us the value of money. You taught us the value of a good work ethic." And so, even though it was tough, there was that aspect of blessing. It really was. It really was.
And I mean, obviously that was a different time than what we're at today. And the 80s is synonymous with what you're saying. Is, you're definitely not the only person that went through the same struggle. But during that time, I mean, mentally, how hard was it you move back, you left a good career, you're doing what you love, but it didn't work. Like at that point, it just didn't work. And then to go through the process of filing bankruptcy, like, was there a feeling of embarrassment or like a thing of like, what did I do wrong? Or was it just because, I mean, I just have to imagine that had to be so emotional because you love the land, you love what you're doing. And then you're basically have to reset your life with the family. I can't even imagine.
That's very true. Very true. Probably one advantage I had is I was looking around a lot of other young farmers that were in the same boat, but they'd never been off the farm. I had been off the farm. I had worked the corporate scene. I knew that I could go back if I needed to. And I remember Judy and I talking about it. Is that what we want to do? Well, one of the reasons we came to the farm was to raise our kids. And so with that decision, I knew what I didn't want to do. And therefore, we deliberately chose to stay. And I worked for a factory for a couple of years, which I didn't enjoy all that much. But then I, started going to carpentry. But there again, I was using my hand, going that way. So the advantage that I had, like I said, I knew what I didn't want because I'd been there. And there again, I'm glad we stayed. We stayed on acreage, and so I'm glad we did. I really am. Yeah.
Chad, what was your perspective? I don't know how old you are, how old you were during the dark age, as your dad references it. But what was your perspective as maybe just being a little kid and kind of living through this?
Yeah, well, I think so. I would have been in '84 when they filed. I would have been 14 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
So some of it I remember well, but the earlier ages, when you're younger, I don't have much recollection of. They did a good job of hiding a lot of that stress, even though
Mhm.
I'm sure there was a lot of it. Um, but living through that, um, I, I think there were a couple life lessons that I learned from it. One is I would say my view on debt.
Mm.
That back in those days, there was the kind of the Dave Ramsey of that day was a gentleman by the name of Larry Burkett. And I
Okay.
went
Yeah.
through one of his courses, and so I had a commitment when I went to college that I would not go into debt. I would stop and work before I would go into debt through college.
Wow.
And God honored that. Made it through 4 years in college, no debt. And now my view on that has changed some through like Rich Dad Poor Dad and others, and see that there's good debt and there's good debt and there's bad debt. But I think that is one lesson that I would not have had the same conviction about had I not seen Lee and Jeannie go through what they went through. I
Mhm.
would say the second, I would say a life lesson from that was like that is said many times. If it were not for our faith in Jesus Christ, uh, they would not have been together. They would have been divorced.
Mhm.
And being a kid and seeing that commitment to something bigger than the material things had a huge impact. Huge impact.
Mhm. Yeah, I could imagine. And d and tell me a little bit about, like, the land market leading up to the '80s, and then even throughout the '80s too.
Well, what happened, I think, the land became overpriced, and they were buying, and borrowing, and young farmers like me were trying to get started. And consequently, I had to borrow to get going. Um, and then the crash hit. I mean, I think our land in the early '80s was valued at the neighborhood of $1,800 to $2,500 an acre. And then when the crash hit or the '80s hit, I think the guy that bought our land um, from the land bank paid $500 an acre.
Wow.
So that's a drop of 85%, and that was kind of the what was going on. A lot of notes. The banks were calling in the notes, and if you didn't pay, that's what was happening. And a lot
And
of the young farmers just didn't have
equity
uh,
to
equity, yeah, to keep going.
so when you say they called the notes, is that, for example, let's say you owed $100,000 on a farm and they called the note. So basically at that point, did you have a certain amount of time to either refinance, like explain that for someone during that time period? Like, what does that mean?
Well, what that means is basically you're not, rather than loaning you more money for more operating expenses, they say we're calling it out. So what happened? I didn't own the land. My dad owned the land, but um, he had added land to the original 282 acres. So he was up to around over 600 acres that he owned. And the last one that he paid for, or they bought, was, I think he paid for the Johnson farm probably $1,500 to $1,600 an acre. So that's why I say it was getting up into that area. Uh, but then with the interest rates and et cetera, it just went the other direction, and they started my note. Of course, my dad had signed for me to borrow equipment, and so he ended up. They came after him, and he paid that. I owed some money to different three different dealerships and whatever. Um, the land bank, they took everything except I think you were allowed $10,000 of equipment or something, and so they took all the money at the auction, and that's kind of where we ended up. So
Is there anything you would have done differently? I mean, I know, and that's probably not even a really healthy question because there's nothing you can do different. But you've had to ponder of like, well, I mean, it sounds like you operated with a pretty good business plan. Um, but is there something that you felt like you did wrong other than just having some really crappy luck?
You always think that. You always ask that question. I mean, that's a common question. I think it's fair to ask it.
Uh-huh.
Um, Probably, I knew of some young men that they saw it coming and they went ahead and got out earlier.
Mm.
But I'm probably just stubborn, pig-headed, or whatever. And I said, I've got to make this work. I want to make this work. And so I was not one of those. My brother, he, I think it was early '80s. He saw it was coming. He was doing the dairy, and he sold out and went to Denver. But there's an aspect of the family farm, dad's farm. I want you to keep that. There's an aspect, I don't want to quit. I got to carry it out. So there's some emotional things there, carrying on. Um, I wouldn't say that I'm a real good numbers guy, uh, but I just worked hard. I remember one year, I don't know if I think it was 84, 83. I worked at a shop, manufacturing company, and I was farming 600 acres, and I was helping my dad with his 600 acres. And I was going to work at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I was working until probably 12 o'clock at night.
Hmm.
And my wife says that's probably the most toughest year that she had, because that's probably the year I about lost my family, because I was gone.
Hmm.
And but by God's grace, we were able to survive, and boy, the rest of the story is much better than this story. Let me
Right.
tell you that.
Yeah. Yeah. I hate to like peel back the Band-Aid and dig deeper, but to me, it's a conversation that I think everyone listening should feel privileged that you're willing to share, because it's something that most people don't want to talk about. I mean, everyone loves to come on here and talk about how great they are and how many great decisions they made, but I mean, in reality, those don't teach us as much as something like this.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate it. And um, do you think that what happened in the '80s could happen again today? Because obviously now there's a lot more. I feel like there's just a lot more aid for farmers. Um, I mean, there's a bunch. Like the Farm Bill is way more comprehensive than what it was then.
Well, I wouldn't say that it couldn't happen. I've asked myself that question a number of times, uh, depending on the debt load. But you look at it, the numbers that I've seen, Jake, the average age of farmers now is much higher than it was then. And the farmers that did survive that, um, they turn around, were able to pay down debt, or and take care of stuff. And the numbers that I've seen is the big difficulty now is if those farmers are retiring like me, and it's getting young farmers in. Now the advantage is, yes, there is crop insurance. There is other things that kind of step in to kind of help things along. Um, and I don't keep up with all of that, really. So whether it could happen or not, it would be nice to say it can't. I don't place a lot of confidence in government. I really don't. My security does not lie there, and therefore, I mean, we have some CRP and some different. So I'll use
Mhm.
it carefully that, but God has blessed us now to where I don't have to depend upon on that, and my goals are different. I'm older, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of changed a little bit.
Mhm.
I think it'd be pretty difficult for it to happen today, but it could happen. I mean, that's going to go back probably to the individual rather than the large scale that it did then.
Mhm. That's fair. What would be a piece of advice you would give someone that was in the same shoes at your point, like today? So obviously the land market's been really strong, and interest rates they're not 20%. People are complaining about them now, but they're not 20%. They're 7 or 8%.
Yeah.
And so maybe, I mean, what would if I said, "Hey Lee, I'm looking to buy a piece of ground. I have a down payment saved, and I've always wanted to own land, and I know the return doesn't pencil out really that great on paper, but I just want to own land for the same emotional reasons that you wanted to own land." What would you tell that person?
Well, I'm a risk taker, obviously. but I say they've got to be committed for one thing. Look at the numbers. If looking at the numbers, and if there's if you have the down payment, that's huge. How much time, do you have to make those payments? How are you going to make that? Do you have an outside job? I think Chad probably answered that even better than I can, because he's a bit of a number person looking at business wise and that. But just be careful, and that's the other thing is just know that that's what you really want to do. Be committed to it.
Mm-hmm. So it comes down to commitment and prioritizing, you would say.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. What would you say, Chad?
Well, listening to there's a podcast I listen to once in a while called the Land Podcast, and
Right.
I think the host or some of his guests would say, well, just make sure you've got enough to be able to make the payments, and think through what the contingencies are, and think through the worst case contingencies, and if you still have confidence that it's the right move for you, then don't hesitate to pull the trigger when the right one comes along, because I think that's what gets a lot of us, it's like, man, that's a lot of money. And so we wait and wait and wait. And then the price just keeps going up and up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And then people always think, well, we just heard Lee say the price has dropped 80%. And they're thinking, well, I'm smart enough to time it perfectly. And then next thing you know, 2 decades go by and you still don't own an acre of dirt.
I think, we'll get this a little bit later, but having gone with Dad and buying a little bit more land, no matter what price you're paying, you think you're paying too much. Because even what we bought, it was like, wow, we're paying the full appraised value of it. And then, now it's worth double that just 3 years, 4 years later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's very interesting. And so I guess kind of getting back to the timeline here, you file for bankruptcy, and then your father passes away, and you go and get odd jobs and work in the factory and do construction. And then how did life go on from then? I mean, because I can slightly imagine, but I truly cannot have enough empathy to be in your exact shoes.
Well, after the 80s, I worked for a factory for about a year, well, actually 2 years. And then I joined a group of guys, the three of my friends, and I began a carpentry business. And I learned a lot from them, went out on my own. I love to work with my hands. I like working with people. And so that's been all right. That was good. I enjoyed that. My wife, during her nursing, that's what pulled us through those years. And so, but then in 1994, she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And that was a blow. It was 3 days after our daughter's wedding that she woke up numb from waist down. I mean, it hit just like that. And so that kind of transitions your whole perspective, for sure. And that led us, by that time, of course, we're not farming, we were able to purchase acreage, which is amazing how that happened too. Another whole story. And 6 acres right on the highway, beautiful. We loved the place. It was just the guy we bought it from, his grandfather built it. So the house was over 100 years old. I hadn't had much update, but since I was gotten into carpentering, did a lot of updates on it. But with the MS, it changed our perspective and what can we do to help her feel better. And as a nurse, her sister's a nurse, they did a lot of research, and they decided not to take the medication. In fact, we had a doctor tell us the side effects of the medication might be more severe, we just don't know, than what you're experiencing. And we thought she was having difficulty walking. She was very fatigued. She was starting to step, might have to do that kind of continue nursing and so on and so forth. Fortunately, she was a home health manager, so she didn't have to be on the floor. 2 years into that, God led us into a product called Juice Plus, which is fruits and vegetables capsule. That became a business for us. Jeannie's energy level jumped 80% within probably 2 or 3 weeks.
Wow.
And like I said, that became a business for us where God blessed that business amazingly. So she was able to, by this time, step out of nursing and and work with this company. And that's what enabled us in 2007. It's kind of funny. It's like you always kind of look at the paper, looking at what's coming up with the ads, and I saw this little clip in the paper, farm sale coming up December 17th. It's 2007. Wow. Look, oh, that's the family farm. Wow. Should I? Could I? Maybe. And so we started thinking, and the farm sale was about 2 weeks away, maybe 3 weeks away. And I thought about it. We prayed about it. And the thought went to my mind, well, do you want to go broke twice? Why are you doing this for? Honestly, Jake, I talked to a friend of mine who has property right next to it, and had been approached by the same man 6 months earlier to buy it outright. And I really would, even I had 40 acres, like what you talk of, something, where I could do some hunting and something we call ours. And I said, okay, I don't have to have it. Lord, I'd love to have it, but I don't have to. And I gave it up. And the Monday, about 2 days later when the sale was, I told Jeannie, I said, I want to go down the auction. I just want to see the old neighbors and kind of see how it goes for. And I expected at that time it would go for around $3,500 an acre. And went down. My neighbor friend was there also. We sat down, and he was, I think, there for the same reason I was. And auction started, and started $1,500 an acre, pop, and stalled out at $1,750. And one of the guys said, oh, make a telephone call. Well, yeah, go call his banker or whatever. My friend leaned over and says, you want some of that land at that price? I said, that price, I sure would. Well, I would too. I don't want all of it, but if we could split it, and if I could rent your pasture. And I said, yeah. He said, I'll take care of the down payment. That's what happened. And then I walked home, or drove home, and stepped in the house. I hadn't said a word. My wife looked at me and she said, you didn't. And I said, Joe and I did. I told her the story. We got it for under $2,000 an acre.
Wow.
And she looked at me and she said, can we build a cabin on it? So she was right in with me. And we got everything settled in 2008. And
which is another financial crisis, right? Like 2007, 8, 9. It's like you lost it on one financial crisis, and then you were able to buy under market again. And the next like that's crazy that farm came up for auction, and you were able to buy it for a steal.
God bless that business enough, Jake, where we bought the farm. It's paid for. I built this cabin. It's paid for. I've got a 60 by 40 foot machine shed out here. It's paid for. I mean, everything on this farm is paid for. And I'm kind of reverting back to, I didn't have to borrow for all of it. We had some, I had some property, some rentals, doing different things. And so that's what's amazing. So it's just been a kind of a dream come true. And even a greater satisfaction on my part, Jake, is I have 14 grandkids. Half of my grandkids are Chads. And they live about 12 miles away. But I have been able to teach them how to pull thistles, fix fence, build fence. When I was building the cabin, I helped show them how to lay out walls, put up trusses, drive tractors, pick up hay. And not just the work side of it, but just the communication side of spending the time with my grandkids has just, it's what's given my heart most joy. It really is, because that is just passing on not just stuff, but legacy and life lessons. And that's been probably my greatest joy on both my wife and I.
Yeah, that's incredible. And Chad, and I assume obviously you moved back to to the home area at one point. So like, what was the timeline on them acquiring this farm? Were you back already, or did you move? What's that timeline?
Yeah. So funny parallels to our lives in that. So starting when Lee said he shot his first deer like 200 yards away, and I shot my first buck when I was 15 on the neighboring property about 300 yards away from where he's sitting right now.
Yeah.
And then I went to college in Omaha, similar to Lee. We ended up moving to Lincoln, Nebraska, lived in Lincoln, Nebraska for 13 years. And then in 2006 was when we moved into the area. And my business, we could live anywhere we wanted to with the business we were running. We were doing virtual. All of our employees are virtual even back then.
Wow.
And so that gave us the ability to move back wherever we wanted to. And so we moved back to Iowa in 2006, and then it was 2007 when he picked up the farm.
What was your when you found out that he bought it? What was your reaction, or what did you know it was coming up for auction, and you're just like kind of hoping, like, man, it'd be cool if this happens, or what was your thought?
I don't remember much about it. Honestly, I don't. It was, I mean, when you know what it's like, Jake, when you're starting a business, and I was like, so working, sun up to sundown. So it wasn't even just like, oh, Dad's looking at the farm. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, well, it feels like a stretch, but hey, if you can do it, that sounds great. So I did not have any emotional attachment to it at that time at all.
Mm-hmm.
And but yeah, when it actually happened, and going down there and walking the farm and having memories, because I had a lot of memories of there growing up. Of they would have 4th of July events for the neighbors, and I remember some of that close to where the pond is, and so then we just started dreaming with Dad on some of those things. So yeah, it was a good thing.
Yeah, that's really incredible. And so obviously you build your cabin, that's where you're living now. And what has transpired since then? Because that's an incredible story to begin with, but it's crazy how life works out. It's like you couldn't even have wrote that down on a napkin and said, I'm gonna give you the most far-fetched thing ever. And that's about came true.
Well, what's interesting is got the cabin built. We did some hunting here. I couldn't get my oldest son really interested in hunting. My youngest son was a hunter. He spent some time in Montana.
So
And
the truth of it was, my dad and my brother would not take up golf to play with me. So we lived in Lincoln. I used to play a lot of golf. So I would hunt once a year just so I can hang out with them. And until that day I mentioned earlier when I tried bow hunting and got hooked from that point on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, that it's funny how it's interesting to me just hearing your guys' stories of how all of your, shouldn't say all, but a lot of your family values, a lot of your the good family time, lessons learned, and just relationships are all rooted in the land. I mean, you just mentioned you wanted to hunt just to spend time with them, and it's none of all of these things don't happen without running a tractor, putting up all those are tied to land. And if land's not there, I don't know if those things really happen, or the level of depth that they are today.
well, it goes back to value, and you make a dollar's gone. You do something, it's gone. But you get land, that is something more permanent. Also, it gives me just the aspect of land is something that you can't create. God created land, and there's only so much out there. And so with that aspect, I think there is an attachment to it, and it gives you a kind of a foundation, kind of something solid. I just loved it when I was farming with my dad and my brother. We plow in the field, smelling that soil turn over and everything, and seeing the birds in the spring and the baby calves now, in the spring. And of course now we're looking at fawns, other animals in the spring, and so on and so forth. There's just that something that creation is just amazing how it inspires the soul in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And so, Chad, you got into bow hunting and got bit by the bug that I can definitely. I'm right there with you. I've always loved bow hunting, and so
Let me back a little bit, Jay, because
yeah,
I'd always gun hunted, and my dad had a recurve bow when I was a kid. I don't ever remember him using it, and so probably 3 years before Chad started in bow, I picked up bow hunting, And I remember taking that, it was a fiberglass laminate bowl into the shop. And I said, they kind of started delaminate a little bit. And he looked at it and he said, well, we can fix it. And I kind of told him the stories, my dad's and so on and so forth. He said, but I can't guarantee it'll stay together. He said, if I were you, I'd just retire it. And so that's when I got a compound bow. And I was, started hunting a little bit then. And I think that's when you, shortly after
your
that,
encouragement. Yeah.
yeah. And so then Chad picked it up, and he got the bug worse than I did, actually. And I love it, but he really got bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so so obviously you picked up the bow, spent time with the family. How much has your life changed since I've golfed. I golfed way back in the day, and I prefer to deer hunt. Any like anything deer related, even planting trees, I'd prefer that over golf. Like, hey, you have a free Saturday. What do you want to do? You want to golf, or do you want to go work on the farm? I'm picking farm every Saturday. has that flipped for you? Did that flip for you?
100%. When we moved, like when I was into golfing, was when we lived in Lincoln, Nebraska, and then moving back, I maybe golf once a year, maybe once every 2 years now, and I don't want to recount how much time we've spent on the farm and just in habitat and all those things as it relates to hunting and things. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
Yeah, and so I have some notes here, and so you guys are on 111. Is that right? Of the original farm of the 282, is that right?
The original farm, I live on 113 acres of the original
Okay.
farm,
Okay.
282 acres. But then there's a adjacent chunk of land right next to it that I used to work for the farmer that owned it. He was an old bachelor man, and I used to hunt on that ground. And I always, in the back of my mind, boy, it'd be nice to have that. It's timber, probably, what would you say, he said 70% timber, or maybe not quite that much.
160 acre, some old field.
And I had tried to talk to the owner from the bachelor that owned it, sold it to a doctor in Omaha who had an office in Atlantic. And I had tried to get a hold of him just to say, hey, if you ever think of selling it, let me know. And I even talked to his office girl who I knew at church. And she said, no, if he doesn't want to see you, he won't see you. And I thought, well, I guess I won't have a chance at that. And then the same guy that kind of looked over that for him does my custom farming. And he dropped by one day and he said, are you interested in that 400 acres? And I said, well, yeah, but aren't you? I mean, you've been working with it for 20, 30 years. And he said, oh, we've got all the land. He and his son farm together. We have all we need. So he wouldn't give me the doctor's number, but he gave the doctor my number. And a couple of weeks went by. And I thought, he's not interested. And then finally, about 3 weeks, I think, he gave me a call. And he said, oh, let me tell you what, look, I'll meet you. So Chad and I and he and his son met over on the far side. And we talked, I suppose, an hour. And, talking about interest. And basically, the things he told us, he says, well, as a realtor, those realtors, he said, in Florida,
I get it.
He said, we get $6,000 an acre from this for hunting. And for some reason, he wasn't interested in that. He said, I don't want to sell it to that farmer over there. I don't want to sell it to that farmer over there. That's where we left it. And I think he came back one more time, and we talked again some more. And then we tried doing an appraisal on the land. He said he had appraised it a couple of years before. And long story short, he invited us to his home in Omaha and gave us the appraisal that he had made of the 2-year-olds 2 years before. And we looked at that. Chad did some more research on that. And Chad, you said we made him an offer.
And they got accepted, or was it a long delay after that? Or, I mean, you have me on the cliff here.
Yeah, I think our first offer was lower than what they had it appraised for. And there was some, my research was looking at some of the other sales in the area, similar farm ground, and it was, had gone less, but we ended up agreeing to the appraised price, the full appraised price, and which was just under $3,000 an acre back in 2017.
Wow.
No, that was 2020. That was 2020. We bought it in 2020, right before COVID hit.
Yeah.
Another black swan event.
Yeah, that's right.
I see a theme
That's
here.
crazy. I hadn't thought about it in that context before, but that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, yeah, and so we obviously know what happened to land after COVID hit, which was, that's so interesting to me when there's so much information. There's so many smart people out there, and I remember asking around then too, and there was a lot of uncertainty in the market of what's going to happen, and some smart people thought the land would go up, and they did really well. But and then there's some people that just hit the timing right, and it just worked out too. So that's just a lot of times I think that it's a lot of it's just I hate to say it, but time in the market versus time in the market, and it just kind of worked out with both those. Even 2007, obviously people felt maybe that the economy was struggling at that point, but nothing really hit until 08, 09. And obviously that auction was in 07 and then right before
Yep.
COVID hit. So it's just kind of interesting how all of that,
It's
how
crazy.
all that transpired. And then, so you mentioned you had the land legacy guys out there too. And so that had to be kind of fun to get a different perspective of someone else coming in and coming and appreciating your land and giving you a plan. How impactful was that to what the farm is now today, 4 years later?
Yeah. So for on my part, this is a whole new world for me. I'd started doing a little bit of research just on Lee's 108, 113 acres. What could we do for habitat wise? Because at that point it was a wide open pasture, old mature timber, 30 acres old mature timber, and 30 acres of tillable. So then you get into add another, have another almost 300 acres. It's like, okay, now what? And I don't know how most guys are, but like those trees, some of those bur oaks have been over there for over 100 years. It's like, man, for every tree that you cut down, it's going to take years and years for them to go up. And it's like, you're almost paralyzed because you don't want to make a mistake.
Yeah.
And I'd been on forums, Iowa Whitetail, Habitat Talk, and a bunch of others, and all of them are like, yeah, just cut. You can, you're not going to do anything. And it's like, man. And we decided to research a bunch of these land consultants, and the first one we reached out to, never got a response from. And I think we bought a Packer from a guy down in Missouri, and he gave me like 3 or 4 other podcasts, and Land Legacy Guys was one of them. I started listening to it and just appreciated their like habitat first approach to deer hunting strategy, and ended up having Adam come up and do the consult, and it gave us more than anything, it gave us the confidence that we may have done the right thing, but it would have taken just cut years off the process for us.
Yeah.
And then work in that process, and it's taken longer because I can only get down there once or twice a week, and we've done some other things just from the income side, some hedge bow staves, and so that takes more time than just going through and cutting everything down. But it's been worth it. It's been good to get my boys knowing how to run a chainsaw and on all those kind of things. So yeah.
That's what I actually have their habitat calendar that Ryan Kirby designed behind my shoulder here. So that's really cool.
That's awesome.
And you're right. I think there's a lot of people that I'm generalizing, but I'm just going to try to poke in other people's brains here. I think a lot of people maybe have too much pride to hire someone that has more experience than themselves. So like, you're not going to tell me what to do on my ground. But how I look at it, that exactly what you said, like you were on the right track, but it sped it up substantially to where now you have an executable plan. I need to be doing this, instead of kind of, I think I'm doing it right. And you're not confident. And then, so I think there's a lot of value in that.
But it was really difficult for me because I had to do a paradigm shift. I have a farmer brain.
Sure.
And you go in, you take the trees out, and you plant. And so it was.
What's a weed?
That's right. And so it was difficult for me to really kind of change my thinking, and I think what really helped, you don't want to listen to your son. I mean, what does he know? But just the aspect that he brought in these guys that were consultants, and we would ask questions. We'd walk with them through the timber, just the foresters and different ones, and that helped me to transition from just plowing and planning and so on and so forth to, okay, we can do something that's really kind of unique in this area.
Hmm.
And in fact, we've had people say that our timber area there is probably one of the largest timber area in a lot of a whole area that is still kind of old and
Old
still,
growth.
yeah, old growth and everything. So, and then like Chad said, cutting down these trees. I mean, I love trees. I do, and so just to methodically, not methodically, but intentionally in the right way, and that's what we're working on doing.
Yeah, yeah, that's rare. That's something I always have appreciation of walking any farm that's old growth now, because especially where I'm at, it's rare. And to kind of step back in time, and I always like looking at the composition of the timber and guessing when what happened 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 100 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and I think that's always fun to just kind of guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing the first time we walked the timber with a forester, when what you could tell, like we have these big bur oaks that are very wolfy, which means their
Hmm.
branches are low to the ground, and but it's in the middle of hickories and walnut. And she's like, at one point this was wide open, and then she went back and looked at a 1938
Mhm.
photo of the farm, and it was like wide open,
Hmm.
oak savanna type. And then she, like when she saw two stumps coming out of like side by side, she said, yeah, that's been harvested at one point, like they've been harvested, and now you've got
Hmm.
two trunks coming up. And just it was just like mind-blowing, the information and knowledge that you can gain just by observing and walking around with somebody with that kind of knowledge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It is. It's crazy what the forest will tell you if you stop and look. And
Yeah.
because I mean, as a kid, I just walked like, there's a tree, there's a tree. But now I'm sure it's the same for you. I mean, that was probably the same thought. And now you have that information. You look at every piece completely different. And I don't know if that's a good or bad thing because now I look at everything with a different eye. Yeah.
I was talking with my 17-year-old son. We've hired him to help cut hedge trees and other trees. And he's like, yeah, Dad, now I'm walking through the timber. I don't see trees the same. And just in the 2 months that he's been working with us, he's like, I look at it completely different. Like, that'd make a good post, or that one might even be a good bow stave. Um, yeah, yeah.
that that's really cool. Is there? I mean, I think your guys' story is obviously very inspiring. Lee, you had every reason just to quit and throw in the towel and coast out the rest of your life, right? I think a lot of people would consider that, but I think what I hear is you obviously had a lot of faith, and you where you're at today. It's Did you think you would end up where you're at right here today in 1984?
No, no, I really didn't. Some people say you have a dream, just dream, get your dream. Well, I never dreamed that I'd be back at the family farm. I just didn't.
Mhm.
Um, and I think, a couple of things go to my mind. One is the fact that, I strongly believe that you don't get to have, you get to give. And so, one thing that we've done, even with the cabin and like taking my granddaughters out riding this afternoon, we have people come down. We have a condo in town, and so we go back and forth. But we have people come and stay for a week, a weekend, a day. People, right, quite frankly, they're stressed. Life is not easy, and so we like to be okay. If you have some time, if you want to, come on out, stay for a day, stay for 2 days. We had one family, they celebrated their 50th anniversary here. Their whole family of 15 came down and stayed here. They loved it. Next week, we have a young couple that was married 6 months ago. And they said, can we come down and spend a weekend? I said, sure. And so part of the joy is not just having to have, but, having to be able to give and holding things with an open hand.
Mhm.
Because, a verse that's helped me a lot is that what do you have that you haven't received? Now, if you received it, why do you boast? And so, yes, I work for this, but who gives me the ability to work? Who gives me the ability to think? And I think it's the Lord. And so, to be able to look at life that way and rest in life that way, and I think that's probably the key. Um, this is just a temporary place. It's beautiful. I love the land, but it's still temporary. I can have it imagined that I think there's going to be a farm in heaven. I really do. Oh well, we do know it's going to be a new heaven and a new earth, and I won't have to fight the thistles then. Maybe not those thistles. the old hedge trees that have the thorns and all the multiflora roses and everything. So,
Uh-huh.
yeah, that's kind of how I look at that. And I think that's a vision of an area of looking at life from a much broader landscape than just here this little bit. It's much life is much more than just this temporary thing. It really is. And so impacting people's lives. In fact, Chad and I have talked quite a bit about how can we use even this land to impact people's lives. There's already we have the young girl that came out of South Chicago. This with my granddaughter. She'd never ridden a horse before. And we got back and said, "What do you think of that?" She says, "I loved it." And and there's been multiple families and couples and children that have come out and spent some time, and the land is not an end in itself. It's simply something that we have that we can use as a tool, and that's really our goals. We would like to be able to use the hunting thing to maybe reach out to those who maybe can't hunt or have never hunted, and give them the opportunity of seeing a turkey out there strutting or whatever it is. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, that's incredible. Chad, I have to imagine, obviously, for a lot of your, I would say, later childhood, you guys didn't own any land, right? And then was it a personal goal for your end? Like, obviously, I'm sure you had some form of love for land growing up, on the farm. And then there was a point where, wow, we had that. Now we don't. And now my dad went from being a farmer and he's working in a factory now. Was that a goal of your own at some point? Like, I would really like to own some land, or did that happen once you got bit by the hunting bug?
So, I'm pretty practical. So I look at life. I would say up until that point, I looked at a lot of life through the ROI lens, like what kind
Mm,
of return. So I we own some real estate in Nebraska still, and so is when I would look at land compared to multifamily apartments, I didn't see it. Just the return, just so for, up until yeah, I would say for me personally, up until that point that started hunting, I didn't see land as a great investment for me personally. But
mhm.
then when you see the personal fulfillment and the investment both coming together, that you don't have necessarily at a multifamily, especially when you have somebody else managing them now.
Mhm,
That's when it switched for me. Yeah.
mhm.
So as much as I'd like to say, yeah, I always wanted to get back to it, that probably wasn't a reality for me.
Yeah, well, I think that's interesting, and that's something that's really hard to explain because if you wanted just a safe way to make money, you're gonna buy a multifamily or go throw it in the S&P 500 index and forget about it for 10 years. Um, but to the point, it's okay. What are the returns that land provides that you can't get in
Can't
other
measure.
investment
Yeah.
vehicles? Yeah, and so like spending time with your son or him learning to like what value do you put on that, or what value is peace and quiet? I don't know. It's
Yeah.
different probably for everyone, but it's worth something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And so, since you bought that piece, and you guys sound like you guys bought it right, the timing was well. Do you look at land as a moving forward? Do you consider land more of a legitimate investment? Twofold, obviously, in the return and also the enjoyment, because you did really well, probably better than a lot of other forms of real estate.
Well, for my
For,
part, the 113 acres that we live on now and what I paid for it and everything, I've been offered three times or been praised three times what I paid for that. So in that sense, that's 113 acres. Of course, I've got the cabin on it, and that type of thing. And it's the setting. It's the setting. It's not the land. It's the setting. It's just end of a dead end road. Talk about quiet and peaceful. It really is. I've had people say, "Hey, I wish there had it like that."
Wow. Yeah. Well, and Chad, what about your perspective on it
and for
now?
me, I look at the listings all the time. Yeah, I do. And we've even, I mean, we've gone to some auctions, and I think I've even bid on another farm or two, but nothing else has come together, and that's all right. We'll wait.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, talking to neighbors, it's like, hey, if something ever happens, let me know. We're
hmm
definitely open to it.
Yeah. That's really interesting, and it's crazy how it's so I don't know. I always wonder, like, what's life going to look like for me 40 years from now? And it's hard to picture that. And then it's like, it's not even worth bothering to think about because, like, in here, it's hard. It's crazy how life it can really unfold. It's just truly, you can't plan anything. I mean, you
Yeah.
can, but not to what's happened. Is there any other pieces of advice that either of you wish you would have known when you were younger or before you started getting into land, or something that you've learned up to this point that you think would be valuable for someone that's wanting to buy land? Because there's a lot of people that listen to this that already own quite a bit of ground, and there's people that are working two jobs and just trying to squirrel away money to buy their first farm. And so there's a full spectrum of people here. But what I love about this platform is I always learn something or get some level of inspiration from every episode. So it's probably more selfish than anything. So the whole reason I'm asking.
Well, one thing goes through my mind, Jake, is living in Omaha, working for the Bell system, in a brand new house, good company. They wanted to work, move up and everything. But I wasn't happy. Then I began to think, okay, I'm spending a third of my life in my job. I mean, that's generally speaking, if you work an 8-hour day.
Mhm.
And I said, if I'm spending a third of my life doing something, and I hear this all the time, people live for the weekend. They hate the week. They go out the job. They live for the weekend. And what kind of life is that? And so that aspect, I said, when I started analyzing that, then my wife and I talking about, okay, where do we want to raise our kids and so on and so forth. I don't want to spend a third of my life doing something I hate. And so that was one thing that helped me make the decision to step out to the farm.
Mhm.
And of course, sometimes it's more than just an 8-hour day, obviously. But there again, because it's something I like, hey, if you have a job that you like, you never work a day of your life. And not that there's some times when it's tough, but still is the aspect you feel like you're doing something. When I see my grandkids how they enjoy it, what they've learned, what they've grown, spending time now with my son, and just working out there. Goodness, I'm 75 plus years old, and I'm out running a chainsaw and riding horses this morning, and I enjoy that, and I like to keep busy. I want to keep active, and my wife, fortunately, with the MS, she has done amazing. It's been 30 years ago since she was diagnosed. Um, it's to the point where we've actually written a book about our life, and that is something that it just really kind of reveals. We've really been really open, told much the same story of what you're hearing, probably a lot more detail. I see a lot of people here, oh, we accomplished this, but they don't realize the pre-stories before that, because oftentimes there's failure and struggle and difficulty before you get to the accomplishments. And that's what life is. And so, it's just amazing to me that find something, stick with it, make a decision to where in my mind, where you believe that God wants you to be, and be there. Bloom where you're planted. I've used that phrase many times. Bloom where you're planted, and so that's just something that has really helped me to endure as well as to enjoy.
I like that. And Chad, you're an entrepreneur at heart. I mean, I know that. What entrepreneurial advice or anything else that you'd like to share with everyone listening?
Yeah, sure. So first thing that comes to mind, that you're probably not going to hear Dad mention it, but there was another lesson that I learned in watching, just living through those dark years of the '80s, and that is never sacrifice your integrity. And you know, the power of seeing your father lose everything, but then turn around years later and go back, even though he didn't have to, he still went back and paid those local people who he got his bankruptcy cleared, so he did not legally have to go back and pay for the local grain elevator or the local vendors, but he went back and paid. those guys, and seeing a man walk integrity like that. So one thing is never sacrifice your integrity. Um,
Hmm.
you asked from an entrepreneurial side of things. I'm a big reader. I'm a big believer that there's always more to learn, and it seems like the more you learn, the more you realize you have to learn. And so, there's as a reader, there's a lot of books that have impacted me over the years. But one I mentioned earlier, um, it's been around a long time now. But Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad, in terms of helping to have a right mental thinking about money, and even about business, and about it's a good for me. It was a good foundational piece to how to think about work, and working for somebody else versus working for yourself versus owning in a business, and the different quadrants that he talks about there. So
Hmm.
I'd still recommend that book as among others.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think um, that's really amazing, and I think that uh, growing up in that situation and you leading by that example um, is very apparent to where both of you are today, and it's truly inspiring. And I can't thank both of you enough for sharing this story, because I've been looking for this, and it just happened that we were able to get connected, and I'm so thankful for that. And I think that this story should be reminiscent, or should be a very excellent listen for anyone out there to get multiple pieces of data points and whatever the decisions may be moving forward. And what's the name of the book, and where can people find it?
The name is A Determined Hope, and it really explicitly, Jeannie's life was one of determination and one of hope. And we started out writing her story, and of course, we married, it became our story. And when we got finished, it's really God's story. It's A Determined Hope. It's on Amazon. It's on many of the I think other places. Yeah, but it's just a real simple one. It's a very
Mhm.
quick read. It's been we've had some really good comments on it. Um, one of Jeannie's nieces said, "Oh, now I understand some of the things that I endured, family wise,
Mhm.
just by reading the book." And there's been other positive things too. It's a story of our life opening up to people, because there is hope, there is joy, there is purpose, and that's what the world looks for. That's what the world needs, and I think it's centered in the person of Jesus Christ, uh, and spreads out from there.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I'll certainly share that link to the Amazon listing, and I'm going to order a book as soon as we finish up here. And
Thank
Chad, feel free to share anything that you have going on. I know you run multiple businesses, and feel free to plug whatever you'd like.
Well, I would just like to Lee's point, go to adeterminedhope.com. That's probably the quickest way you can find about that book. Um, he didn't mention it at all, but Lee is also an Abe Lincoln presenter. He's been doing that for 30 years, loves doing it. So abelincoln.org.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, since he had a son who was in the internet business, we were able to get that domain name
That's right.
probably 20, 25, 30 years ago. So about the time that Al Gore invented the internet, we bought abelincoln.org. And yeah. My company is 5q.com. We do websites, mobile apps, mainly in the nonprofit ministry space. But
Hmm.
um, yeah, that's us.
Yeah, incredible. I can't thank you both enough, and I'll give you guys a chance to close out with whatever you want. And I just want to say thanks again.
Well, I just want to thank you, Jake, for just for inviting us on, spending your time, and for being a good host and letting us kind of speak from our hearts. I appreciate that.
No, it was my pleasure, honestly.
By the way, we have some really good hunting right here where we're at. So
Well, I'm gonna probably I'll be calling you in 5 years. That's the next time I'll draw a bow tag, probably maybe 6 years. uh, but if I get out that direction, I'll be sure to track you guys down.
oh, we'd love to see you.
Love to
Yeah,
meet you in person. Yeah. Well, thank
Yeah,
you guys so much.
our pleasure.